Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. As always, I'm glad that you've chosen to spend a few moments with me as we continue to work our way through the big names of the Bible. Today we come to the end of the minor prophets and also to the end of our review of the big names in the Old Testament. And so beginning next week, we'll begin to focus on the big names in the New Testament. For today, however, we're going to take a look at Malachi. That's the very last book in the Old Testament. Now, true to form, as we've learned with most of the minor prophets, there's just not a whole lot that we can say for sure about Malachi. The book that bears his name doesn't give us any biographical information, so we don't know who he was, where he was from, or anything like that. There's even some confusion about his name. You see, the word Malachi means my messenger, and so there's a lot of back and forth about whether that's a name or a title, whether Malachi is the name of a person or whether that person simply identified himself as God's messenger. That's interesting, but anyway, we'll go forward from here. Here's the backdrop of the book of Malachi. As we've seen with so many of the minor prophets, Malachi was addressed to the people after the time of exile in Babylon. They had finally been able to return home. And when they returned home, they set about putting their lives back together. Jerusalem was in ruins. There was no temple. And so, as we've learned from other books, the people had to begin rebuilding the temple and rebuilding their own homes and trying to get their lives together. Once they had rebuilt the temple, they kind of shook their heads and said, it's not much of a temple. It really doesn't compare to the one that the Babylonians destroyed. And so that was discouraging to them. And then as well, times in Jerusalem were hard. The people had come back trying to rebuild their lives, but it was a hard go. They had trouble making ends meet, trying to earn a living and doing all that sort of thing. And so naturally, the people got depressed and discouraged. And so Malachi was written to people who needed a boost in their spirits. They needed somebody to kind of pull them up short and get them going again. Naturally, what happens when we're discouraged or depressed, we let things slide. We stop paying attention and we don't do our best. And that's exactly what happened with the people during the time in which Malachi preached his message. They began to get kind of casual and careless about all kinds of things, but most importantly, the things that were involved in their faith. So when it came to sacrifices in the temple or making offerings of money, they just didn't do their best. They just sort of did what they could to get by and let it go at that. They also became kind of casual in the way in which they treated one another. They weren't always doing their very best to treat their neighbors as neighbors. So Malachi preached his message and essentially said, hey, wake up. You can't be careless about things that are important. You have to pay attention. Even though times are hard, you have to do your best. And so Malachi called on the people to do a couple of things. The first, he said, when it comes to worship, when it comes to the sacrifices and offerings you make, please do your best to do your best. And so he said, don't do it half-hearted. Put your heart into it and do something that will reflect your love of God and your faith in God. One of the most famous passages in Malachi shows up when he says this. The Lord says, listen, try me, test me. If you will give and be faithful, you will see that I will open the windows of heaven and I will bless you. Malachi's message is that if they got serious about how they worshiped, they would find that God was more than willing to bless them and to give them far more than they imagined. The other part of Malachi's message was, hey, don't forget that we're connected to each other. Remember, God is the Father of us all, and it's important for us to love one another and treat one another with dignity and justice. Instead of being self-centered because you think the times are hard and you want to throw a little pity party, Malachi in essence said, hey, remember that one of the most important things with regard to your faith is how you treat your neighbors. So that's it for Malachi. He sets the stage for the transition into the New Testament. Well, that'll do it for today's lesson. As always, should you have any questions, give me a call, send me an email or a text. I'll be glad to talk with you anytime. I hope this week has gone really, really well for you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care and God bless. Bye-bye.